Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. I have a lot of things to say, and since our chairman today looks very strict, I need to, to manage my time correctly. So, yeah, my name is Alberto Di Meglio. I come from CERN. I'm the head of this unit at CERN called the CERN OpenLab. And what I would like to talk to you about today is really a high-level overview of the major challenges and opportunities in data-driven, data-intensive scientific research, taking, of course, the high-energy physics domain as a starting example. So I will show you a number of examples, and please, I would like you to consider these presentations also as an opportunity for further discussions and collaboration. I'm going to touch upon a number of interesting, in my opinion, directions or areas of research on which there is a lot of work to do. So again, it's all about collaboration. So let me start with my one slide history of science. Of course, I'm sure you know all about this, but just to set the context. So, of course, for many, many years, scientific research has been all about empirical observations and interpretation of natural phenomena according to the particular thinking of philosophers and scientists in particular moments of time. This has gone on for many thousands of years until about 500 years ago, where the formal reproducible experimental method and the first mathematization of science started, Galileo Galilei, for example. And this produced the outstanding advances in science in the last few centuries, the theory of gravitation, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, quantum dynamics, relativity, and so on. Until about 50 years ago, when the computers started being used for science as well, and then all the mathematical models becoming very, very complex to solve in exact terms were solved numerically with the computers, producing very detailed simulation of this phenomenon. Today, we are in something that it is called the fourth paradigm, is something invented. The term has been invented by Jim Gray, he's a fellow at Microsoft in 2009, and fourth paradigm is a sort of combination of all that. It's very large-scale, data-intensive scientific research where you put together the observation, the theoretical models, the simulation, and the computing to solve very difficult and very important problems of fundamental science. Now, CERN is one of the examples of this kind of model of working. The high-energy physics is an international collaboration of thousands of people. CERN itself is a collaboration of 23 different member states and many more observers and collaborators. There are during the year, there are between 13,000 and 15,000 people working at CERN to solve these interesting fundamental physics problems. Now, CERN itself is not about the scientific research. The scientific research, the physics research, is done by the experiments that use CERN, the accelerators at CERN, as an instrument for their research. And this is the accelerator. So let me just very brief information in case you are not familiar with this. But so the yellow line is the current main accelerator. It's the Large Hadron Collider, 27 kilometers in circumference. For comparison, this is Geneva Airport here. The whole of the airport could stay many times inside this circle. And there are many other accelerators that historically have been used for other experiments and today are used as an initial boosting stage for the Large Hadron Collider. So, in the collider, there are two counter-rotating beams of hadrons, heavy particles, so protons or ions, that never touch, so they go in parallel inside the accelerator, and they are moved to hit each other in 4 points where the 4 main LHC experiments are sitting today. Atlas, CMS, ALICE, and LHCb. So together, collectively, the raw data produced by the 4 experiments, it's about 1 petabyte per second of data, which is an amount of raw data that with today's technology cannot be processed in real time. cannot be analyzed. So it would take, just for example, only for storing this, I mean, taking standard disks as a comparison, it would mean storing more than a few thousands of these hard disks per second, which is something that, of course, cannot be done. So how to cope with this? What has happened until today is that a lot of this data, about 99% of this raw data, is actually discarded, is rejected, according to a number of simple rules that are encoded inside what is called the standard model of physics today. What is left after this initial processing is then moved into the CERN computer center, where the rest of the processing starts. Today, just to give you a few numbers, the CERN computer center has almost 300,000 cores for processing cores. Almost a half an exabyte of storage capacity, 35,000 kilometers of fiber optics going around the site. And this represents only around 25% of the entire capacity of the high-energy physics community around the world. So what happens after the data is processed initially in the CERN computer center, it is then distributed across the world. CERN is called the tier 0, where data is generated, and the other sites are a sort of pyramid structure of distribution of data and computational tasks. Today there are 13 tier 1 centers and a couple of hundreds of tier 2 centers around the world doing this processing. So it's really a very large international collaboration. So this has worked very well until now. The main reason for this until now has been to complete the standard model, find this elusive Higgs boson, and this has been done and officially announced in 2012. And this has sort of concluded the last big missing piece of the standard model. So now we have to move forward. What's next after that? So the problem is that the standard model itself, this classification of particles and interaction, actually describes only 5% of what must exist in the universe for the universe to be as it is. If you look at galaxies, the way they move, the speed of rotation, there must be much more mass producing the actual gravity that exists in the universe. So what is out there? Today, of course, you know about the discussions about dark matter, dark energy. The term dark means indeed that it is not clear what it is. And there are many open questions about matter and antimatter. Why antimatter doesn't exist in nature, in the universe, in the part of the universe we live in, at least. Although it can be created in laboratory, of course. And what is the relationship between the microscopic quantum world and the macroscopic gravitational world? So there are many open questions that until now have not been answered. So what can we do next? So just to give you a general idea of the difficulty. This is searching for the Higgs boson was compared to looking for the proverbial needle in the haystack. Now, that is in general difficult, but it is actually easy, because you know what a needle is, you have a definition of the needle, and you know what a haystack is, you have a definition of the haystack. So if you have enough time and enough computing power, you can actually look for something specific and find it. Now, the problem is from now on, this doesn't work anymore. We have to find a needle in the middle of many more needles, and we don't have a precise definition of everything else. So this requires a lot more ingenuity and a lot more innovation to actually solve these problems. And this has an interesting effect on the IT, on the information computing technology part, on computer science and data science. So this line, the blue line here, represents what is called the luminosity of the accelerator. It is essentially a measure of how many particles you can put in the cross-section of the beam. So the more particles you have, when the two beams collide, of course, the probability of something happening, of a collision happening, increases. So if you can increase the luminosity, you increase the amount of collision. And if you increase the amount of collisions, of course, you increase the data that is produced. So today we are here. And in the next 10 years, we are going to increase this luminosity by at least an order of magnitude, moving into something that will be called the high luminosity LHC, Large Hadron Collider. And look at this, so you see later, but look, this is there is something called the trigger rate, which is today 1 kilohertz, and it will become sort of an order of magnitude higher for the high luminosity LHC. This is important. So, in terms of computing resources and storage resources, this means that in the next 10 years, the community, in order to keep working on this, will have to increase the capacity by at least something between 1 and 2 orders of magnitude. Now, if you take today's technology and you assume a standard evolution of today's technology for the same kind of price, probably in the next 10 years you can get 1 order of magnitude more capacity. But this is not enough. So it is necessary to really look at different ways of working, different ways of processing information, and more performant, more efficient ways of processing information in order to cope with the requirements. You see this steep increase by the time of the high luminosity LHC for both computing and storage. So most of the research today, the technology research to support this, is about solving this problem. And so, as a general overview, so there are 4 areas of painful activities. One is about just increasing capacity. Can we buy more? The second is increased performance. Yes, maybe we can buy more, but can we buy more performant, more efficient resources? The third item is about increasing efficiency. It doesn't matter if we have more, it's still not enough. We need to work better. And of course, we need to keep this at a reasonable cost. Our budget is flat. The contribution from the member states don't increase, so we have to keep the same cost during the years. So it's a very big challenge. There are 3 areas of investigation today. One is increased performance, hardware and software, within the existing facilities. The second item is how to increase capacity by pulling together different types of resources, moving from our current distributed infrastructure, adding, for example, commercial clouds capacity or specialized clouds, or including supercomputer centers in the architecture, which is something that traditionally the high energy physics research has not done. And third is about really changing the way we work. And broadly speaking, today this is really a lot about artificial intelligence, or at least machine learning and deep learning flavors of artificial intelligence to speed up the different workloads and the different processes end to end, from data acquisition to the final probability distributions. Now, to make sure we use the same terminology, there are, this is very high level. There are a lot of missing details here, but formally speaking, there are 4 main computing activities, or 4 main types of workloads. The first one is data acquisition. This is really at the detector level. This is where the physics world of the collision becomes digital. The particles going through the detector are transformed into digital signals. So this is real time. And this is essentially done individually by each experiment. Each experiment has their own processing facility for filtering and processing, doing some initial processing of the raw data. The second step is to take all the dots, all the information, all the signals coming out of the millions of sensors in the detectors, and actually try to reconstruct what has produced, or what the shape, not yet exactly what has produced, but the shapes of the paths, the tracks along which the particles have crossed the detector. And this is a very difficult problem. It's highly combinatorial, and it is done with very sophisticated dynamic propagation techniques, Kalman filters, for example. But it's one of the future bottlenecks, and I show you why. Then, of course, is data analysis. It's going from this information and keep analyzing the data until the different probability distributions of the various events and particles are actually confirmed. And then there is a fourth part, which is about simulation. Simulation is, of course, needed to understand how to design the detectors, to understand how the detector works, and to know, to build a model of what you expect so that it can be compared with the analysis in order to confirm or a discovery or disprove a hypothesis. Now, let me start with computing. So I think you are all familiar with Moore's law. So there are a lot of discussions about Moore's law. Is it dead? Is it not dead? Certainly, in terms of a single-threaded performance, Moore's law is going down. It cannot be expected to keep the pace as it was until now. So the high-energy physics infrastructure today is mainly based on CPU. This is showing a number of limits. So we have started experimenting with many other platforms. FPGAs, not only for the data acquisition part, but for other types of workloads. GPUs, of course, neuromorphic computing, and quantum computing. This is still all very early, very experimental. There is nothing in production in terms of neuromorphic or quantum computing, but we need to start building knowledge today. So let me give you a few examples. So GPU acceleration is the first obvious choice. Probably our community is a bit late in terms of this. GPUs are already used in many other cases, but we are really talking about a very large scale GPU usage at this point. So this shows you, again, this is single threaded, so the comparison is not really fair, but you can see this is essentially Moore's law trend and GPU growth. So GPU performance is increasing according to something very similar to Moore's law. And by the time we get to high luminosity LHC, the difference in performance according to today's trend will be orders of magnitude more. So we really need to transform our computing architecture to take care of this, to use this type of performance. However, this brings phenomenal software programming problems, because the software that has been designed until now was optimized for single-threaded performance with CPU, was designed in the past 20 years. And it has all to be redesigned or revised in order to actually use many core, multi-core platforms and exploit this performance. And from a cost point of view, this is now together becoming very interesting in terms of power consumption and performance price ratio. The other interesting area is FPGAs. FPGAs are already used and have been used for many years in the data acquisition for doing the initial triggering. It's a very fast selection based on simple rules. But in the future, they will have to be used to bring down to the real time as much processing as possible, to start doing some more complex and more sophisticated processing really close to the detector. So today the accelerator frequency is 40 megahertz, so there are collisions, 40 million collisions per second, and through the initial filtering and triggering, it is brought down to 1 kilohertz. And I showed you earlier, this is going to go up to an order of magnitude to 7-8 kilohertz for high luminosity LHC. So FPGAs are used potentially in two forms. So one as just FPGAs, but to do neural network, deep learning inference, very fast inference, very close in the initial triggering mechanism, and down the line, combinations of CPU and FPGAs to actually, again, do inference, but with more sophisticated deep learning neural network models as early as possible in the chain. This is very promising, and it is one of the main directions to be able to increase the trigger rate by 1 order of magnitude. And the next, but we are looking more into the future, is quantum computing. So today, of course, quantum computing cannot be used in production, but there are interesting possibilities in terms of simulators, but also in terms of physical devices. There are many companies already having put on the experimental market quantum computing device with 20 qubits of capacity, noisy capacity, so 20 qubits means probably 16 usable qubits, and there are devices moving beyond the 50 qubit total capacity in this year already. So this is becoming very interesting, and there are a lot of problems, combinatorial problems or classification problems that can be accelerated by using quantum computing. So we are doing a number of joint research projects with companies and other universities to to do a lot of things, test simulators and devices, but also, for example, transform the algorithms so they can be moved from a classic form to a quantum form, and just because of that exploit this increase in computational performance. This is one example. It's for track reconstruction. So this is is a simulation, but this is how it looks like inside the detector. There are many collisions happening at the same time, and you have to look at all the points in order to construct this. So in order to start this process, you have to find what are called the seed points. And finding the seed points is a highly combinatorial problem that takes a lot of computing processing. So quantum computing is one of the hopes, one of the potential interesting technology to actually make this much faster and be able to cope with these increasing levels in the detectors. Storage is another painful point. Storage, in terms of storage, today I don't see any new breakthrough technology coming out. There is a fight between hard disk and SSD disk, solid state, and solid state are winning also for many reasons. They are becoming bigger and bigger, and bandwidth is much better. So we are probably going to move transition from mostly hard disk to mostly solid state. And there are interesting solutions, non-volatile memory solutions with a much smaller size factor, but they are a combination of RAM memory and non-volatile memory that introduce the possibility of a completely different in-memory type of processing. Storage is also, storage for us means storing the important things forever. We store around 80 petabytes of useful information every year now, and this cannot progress with current technology. So we are looking at, again, at future possibilities. And in this case, DNA-based storage shows some interesting properties. It has been announced recently that the first fully automated DNA prototype for storing and retrieving has been made available, again, experimental. And we are working with a couple of companies that are producing experimental devices with very interesting properties for the future. But we are talking about 10, 15 years in the future here. Cloud. As I said, we need to understand how to scale out. Today, CERN has the largest cloud computing infrastructure in the scientific world, not in the commercial world, of course, but in the scientific world. But we need to join this with many other types of resources. And one very interesting and very necessary point is to understand how to link cloud grid with high-performance computing. The high-energy physics is not high performance today, it's high throughput. There is a big difference. What we need is not necessarily to run everything very, very, very fast, but to have millions of jobs sent across the infrastructure so that the probability distributions can be built. And supercomputers are not good at that, and are not good at data intensive until today, data intensive execution. But machine learning and deep learning are actually changing all that. There is a convergence of the two worlds. So, and there is a lot of investment in all countries about supercomputers. So we need to understand in the community how to exploit better the efficiency and the performance that supercomputing provides, putting everything together. Artificial intelligence, machine learning and deep learning, as I mentioned, there are many interesting points about with a lot of potential in using this kind of technology. They can solve a number of bottlenecks, for example, for simulation or analysis, and decrease the amount of resources that are needed. And there are even, so this is something I find very interesting. So you might remember that Galileo used to say that the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics. And today there are ideas about the possibility of using natural language processing techniques to actually move from the raw data to the probability distributions, considering the two things as a language with the physics model as the grammar for this language. So there is no technology able to do this today, but in principle, if this becomes possible with this kind of technology, it really becomes the closest thing to using physics and mathematics as the language of nature and accelerating all these processes. Again, we are talking about probably the next 50 years, but it's good to think big and ahead. So one example for this is a simulation. Today, simulation is done using Monte Carlo techniques, very traditionally, very efficient, very detailed, but it doesn't scale well with resources. If you want to increase the precision of the simulation and cope with the increasing amount of collisions, you need to scale out resources massively. So we are looking into application, for example, of generative adversarial networks for this. So, I'm sure you know, but generative adversarial networks are a combination of two different networks. So you have a neural network generating something, a picture, for example, and another network looking at this picture, trying to detect whether it is a fake picture or a real picture. And if the network is not able to detect, it tells the other network. So if it is able to detect, it tells the other network, this is fake. Do something. And the other network generates a better image using this information. And if you loop this, your image, your fake image, can become so realistic, so good, that it is not possible to distinguish it from the real one anymore. So if we take the simulation of a detector as a picture, as a very big picture, and apply this, we can generate efficient simulations in a much faster time, orders of magnitude faster, with much less resources. So this is one of the main directions of investigation for simulation. And quantum machine learning, again, new frontiers. It is there are many applications of machine learning technology, for example, support vector machines that can be efficiently sped up on quantum computers. And by doing this, it might be possible to actually, again, speed up by orders of magnitude the analysis done. And this is an example of a classification of Higgs boson decays using this kind of technique done in collaboration with Wisconsin University, where it is possible to demonstrate, at least as a trend, that this kind of technology will really have a big impact in accelerating this kind of processing and increasing the overall computational capacity of the infrastructure. Now, I would like to move into a slightly different direction. So what I've told you until now is about the bottlenecks, the difficulties, the problems, and the technological opportunities specifically for high energy physics research. However, one of the objectives of CERN is to share this, is to do this in a collaborative way with other communities. Not only fundamental research is always a trigger for innovation and the creation of new technology. This has always happened. And these are a few examples of what has happened in CERN in the past few years. I mean, the World Wide Web was invented 30 years ago at CERN to manage the problem of sharing information. We use the technology used to create extreme vacuum inside the pipes where the particles run inside the accelerator. So you have to extract as much possible of air, otherwise the particles might hit molecules of air instead of hitting each other. So you really need to do extreme vacuum. But this technology can be used to create very efficient thermal panels that can keep 50 degrees of temperature below several meters of snow for many, many hours. Mechanical engineering, material science, radiation sensor used in medicine, for example. All this technology come out of the technology research to support fundamental research. So we started looking recently at better ways of working with other communities and communities that are producing more and more data today or in the future. And for us today, the most interesting community to work with is biology and medical research. Medical research and biology, if you put together all the different types of discipline, from genomic research to clinical trials and diagnostic systems, laboratory exams, and all that, is producing amazing quantities of information. So can we work with other communities and share problems and find the common solutions. This is something that we really would like to do. So we have a few pilot projects in collaboration with other universities or laboratories to see how technologies we are developing for physics research can be used elsewhere. This is an example of a biological dynamics modeler, again, using the same techniques that are used for simulating radiation propagation. We are doing a biology parameters propagation, and it's a way of understanding whether, starting from basic principles, a few cells, behaviors, and particular chemical or electrical condition, you can actually simulate what happens in a real biology system. And we have managed to find to create very realistic simulations, for example, of the human retina mosaic growth, or to simulate in silico the growth of cancer cells in experimental conditions. So it is very promising, and again, the idea is to work in collaboration with other communities and to put this out in the open source software that anybody can contribute to and increase this kind of expertise as part of the community. The second example is machine-assisted diagnostics. This is also about machine learning and deep learning. We are trying to understand, especially, so this is the first case here is trying to understand how to link input and output of a neural network. This is a huge problem. The neural networks are usually considered black boxes. You don't know exactly why you got a certain input, a certain output, or specifically which input produced a particular output. And this trust issue has enormous problems in many sectors. If you take, for example, autonomous vehicles, so buses or cars that drive themselves. If you cannot trust the decision of the system, you enter in phenomenal problems. If you're sitting there and the car has an accident, who is responsible? Is the car? Is the person inside the car? Is the manufacturer of the car? Is the software engineer? So the possibility of making this process more deterministic is important. And in this case, it's a medical application. You have genetic mutations in the DNA of a person, and this transforms into physical aspects. How can you use, for example, image detection techniques to recognize a small part of the face or the fingers of the body and link this to a specific genetic mutation in the DNA? If this can be done, it would allow very early detection of very important neurological or tumoral diseases. But it is necessary really to understand which particular gene mutation or gene expression has produced a particular physical condition. And the second aspect is automatic diagnostic systems for people. These are virtual doctors, some entity that you can talk to, express your symptoms, and this entity will do an initial filter of condition and then send the person to the most appropriate specialist and speed up all the procedures, especially in countries, in situations where the specialists are not always immediately available. In general, medical data analysis, it's a huge problem. As I said, the amount of data being produced is phenomenal. It's really hundreds of exabytes already today. And there is a huge problem simply of collecting data. Everybody's collecting data. There are dark databases of hundreds of terabytes sitting anywhere in the world. But actually, it's very difficult to act on that data, to do something with that. So we are building, again, is a test platform to test the technologies that might help that and help standardization. And for example, one interesting project that we are starting now on this kind of platform is about efficient data encryption, something called homomorphic encryption. It's a technique that allows you to do deep learning, to create deep learning models, encrypted models, that don't have to be decrypted in order to be analyzed. So you can transfer information, sensitive information containing personal information or medical information across the network and put together as much data as possible from different hospitals and different conditions and try to understand very rare and specific conditions. So this is a project that we have in common with, we are running with a number of hospitals and companies working in this sector. And finally, this is something that I'm very proud to talk about here, because this is a project we have just started in collaboration with the Samara University, which is about trying to use, again, machine learning, deep learning techniques to do early preventive maintenance, predictive maintenance of complex engineering systems. We are using as a use case linear accelerators, both for research and for medical applications. And the idea here is to understand whether it is possible to detect as early as possible anomalies in the way the linear accelerator are working, and warn the operators of the machine in time in order for parameters to be changed or parts to be replaced, and in doing that reduce as much as possible not only the number of problems but also the downtime. So if you have a hospital with this kind of machine, if the machine has to shut down for 6 months for repair, it's a huge loss in terms of human life. So if we can understand how to detect this as early as possible and do really personalized predictive maintenance plans for individual installation, this would, first of all, would save lives, but also would save a lot of money for laboratories and hospitals in many conditions. So it's a very interesting project, and I'm really interested in seeing where this is going next. And this is a small example. We are also working with the United Nations organization, UNOSAT, to speed up the satellite image analysis, again using deep learning, machine learning. These are all social activities, social research with social impact to find ways of increasing the usefulness and the value of what we are doing. Now, just briefly to conclude, how are we doing it? So I mentioned I'm in charge of CERN OpenLab. CERN OpenLab is in the IT department of CERN. It is in charge of running and identifying these research collaborations with industry and research and academia. So there are 4 main activities. Of course, the research activity itself, and the work in collaboration with other communities, medical research, life science, and so on. And the other 2 important activities are communication and education. Communication is very important. We need to explain what we do. And I spend most of my time really talking to people and to companies, universities and researchers, to try to understand the value of collaboration and identify the right opportunities for working together. And finally, education. This is a huge, is both a problem and an opportunity. And it's good to talk about this in a university. So what we see is an important gap in terms of skills for projected across the next 5 to 10 years. If you are going to introduce all these new technologies, how do we make sure that the engineering and the technological skills can keep the pace? So we are organizing with communities, with universities and with companies, educational programs and research programs also targeted to students. So you can see here, this is a snapshot of all the collaborations we have at the moment. And yes, you're here. Predictive, proactive maintenance. So in collaboration with all this, we do research, but we also do education and training. And I would like to take the opportunity to showcase what we call the OpenLab Summer Student Program. This is dedicated to any type of scientific students, computer science, mathematics, physics, it doesn't matter, as long as their talent and skills are a good match for the problems we are trying to solve. So every year we can host during the summer around 40 students, and we receive between 1,500 and almost 2,000 candidatures every year. So it's very competitive, But the opportunity is to stay 9 weeks at CERN, working with us, working with the companies, working with other institutions, and really solve practical problems in any one of those areas that I mentioned until now. So in conclusion, I will not go through all that, but I have a simple message. We are really living in a very interesting moment of scientific and technology history. This fourth paradigm, it's becoming very complicated. It's something that I believe no individual person can address on their own. It's really a matter of collaboration. But we are really seeing a sort of tipping point of technology. Until now, in the past 5-10 years, I've seen improvements of existing technologies, but now really new technologies, real breakthrough things are coming up that we can exploit, and we have to learn how to exploit this. But opportunities, but also responsibilities, again, in terms of education, in terms of collaboration, in terms of working with other communities. So there is a lot of work to do, and again, I'm very happy to be here and talk to you about this. If you have ideas or recommendations, suggestions for collaboration, interesting things you want to do together, I'm always listening, so please talk to me anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, and now we have time for questions. Yes, please, but please use microphone.
I have a rather general question. Sure. You mentioned the 4 steps of science development. Yes. Could you show first slide? So the first step is empirical data. Second step is theoretical. Yeah, and third step is computational, and fourth data-driven. What do you think about striking similarity of first and last steps?
Absolutely. Yes.
Maybe we have here historical spiral, and yes. History just repeats itself on high level.
Yes, thanks. It's a very interesting comment. I agree. Actually, I mentioned that today, until now, we have used the standard model. It was a nice description, and we could look for something. And today we are sort of reversing this. Since the models are not precise enough to allow looking for something, we are really reversing the process. We are collecting as much data as possible and trying to see what emerges from that data. So empirical, reproducible, structured observations are really becoming, again, the base for most of the research. I totally agree.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Nope.
No more questions? Oh. Okay. Could you use microphones so that other people could hear you?
I agree, it is the loop. The issue is only that empirical observations allowed us to interpret that by human beings. And here we basically data-driven science, we are focused on emergent systems. And my question is, that's what I was trying to tell last year. We just want to discover from data new theories, basically, yes. In designing, basically, and creation new materials and so on. So do you have any framework for emergent systems?
No.
No, not yet. Okay.
No, not yet.
And the second, I assume that quantum computers you have from IBM.
As well. So we are working
but
with...
do you get for free or you have to pay?
It depends... It depends on the system that we want to use. There are a number of systems that are openly accessible and other systems that are not openly accessible.
Mm-hmm.
But I cannot talk about the access mechanisms that we have in place.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? In this case, I suggest that we thank our